Okay, next we have Paula Bond with Aerostar to give us an RI and an IRA update.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We'll go ahead and get started. If you want to just move to the next slide, please. So we're going to start like we always do when we look at the RI investigation is the CERCLA overview slide. And if you just click and just keep doing that, then the slides will show up. We talk about the CERCLA process as the preliminary assessment and the site inspection, which are those stages where we look at site identification and historical sampling, and we do administrative research. For Wurtsmith, that's already been done. The next step, the RIFS, remedial investigation and feasibility study, that's the phase that we're currently in, the remedial investigation. And those stages are followed by site cleanup, planning your remedy, and then actually implementing the remedy, and then followed by monitoring the progress, and then eventually long-term monitoring or management and site closeout. Next slide, please. So for the PFAS RI, this is our progress slide that we do show every time, just to kind of give everybody an idea of where we are in the process. The RI scoping was completed some time ago. The final UFP QAP, Uniform Federal Policy Quality Assurance Project Plan, was completed also. The risk assessment work plan and biota sampling plan, those documents are complete. And currently we are in the field data collection stage. And then eventually once we collect all the data, we'll move into the actual the RI report. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Next slide. So real quickly, for the update, we've had some conversations about developing a supplemental PFAS RI UFP QAP addendum. That document will be issued in the first week of June. It's in the final Air Force review phase right now, so we'll be able to get that out. That document addresses additional investigation that we're going to be doing this summer that wasn't included in the original UFP QAP. So some investigation items that came out of one of our previous technical sessions, we've added some work in here that will all be documented in this addendum. The field work resumed on April 3rd. We started back this spring with doing hydraulic profiling of the subsurface, where we're looking to determine the depth to clay for our vertical aquifer sampling locations. So we completed that toward the end of April, and as Beth had mentioned a little while earlier, we're going to start back up with that vast sampling, vertical aquifer sampling, followed by monitoring well installation and sampling that will go on through the end of the field season. And then, we'll just continue with our nature and extent investigation, like I said, continuing through the summer and fall. Next slide. This is a slide that kind of lays out the phases of field work that were initially put into our UFP QAP. We've had some questions, some inquiries from the RAB about our field sampling process and how that field work is going to go. So I just wanted to real quickly kind of lay out for everyone how we are moving through the RI field data collection process. And we have it divided up into 3 different phases. So the first phase of the work, which was initial soil sampling and sampling all the existing monitoring wells out there that we felt we could sample before we moved into additional data collection, that was phase 1. And the little green diamonds that you see on this graphic, I know it's hard to read, the text is a little bit small, those are decision points. So once we collect the data in phase 1, we have a meeting with Eagle to go over the data, and if there's decisions that need to be made on next steps, we have those meetings, and then we move to the next phase. So I'm not going to go over everything on this slide. There's a lot of information here. But phase 1, we are still partially in phase 1 because the soil sampling was completed, but we've had additional guidance and our screening levels have been lowered. So we're going back to do some additional soil delineation. Once we wrap that up, we'll have a meeting with Eagle to go over the data. We'll move into phase 2 and then complete our vast groundwater sampling program. We've already started that. We're not complete, so that is ongoing. And then, but once we collect the vast data and the soil data, we will have another meeting with the regulatory agencies to go over the data, present the data, and evaluate our next steps and what those might be. And then we'll move into phase 3, where we'll collect surface water sediment, pore water data, sample and install new monitoring wells or any other data gaps that we have found in phase 1 and phase 2. So hopefully that gives you just a brief overview of kind of how we move through the data collection process for the RI. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of areas that we're going to accelerate the field work in the RI. Area number 1 is at the wastewater treatment plant, and Steve mentioned that a little bit earlier too in some of the action items. So we are going to collect some data from the wastewater treatment plant infiltration beds, and I know this figure's a little bit hard to see with the shading, but we're going to collect some soil and sediment samples from those infiltration beds to advance our knowledge of the concentrations in this area. Seep samples we're going to collect, soil borings. The second area that we're going to accelerate for the RI is data collection around the aircraft alert area, which will help support the IRA in that area and help with the design as we move through that. So that data collection is going to be first up. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, Mark.
Is the same group that is doing the RI work out there, I don't know who you have contracted, CTI among other people, but are they going to be not doing the RI investigation in other parts of the base and concentrating on the wastewater treatment plant, or are there two different groups?
It's all going to be going on concurrently. So we're going to be collecting data all over the base concurrently. So, but those are areas we want to make sure we get out there first to get that data first to support these other activities going on.
Yeah, we'll have multiple drill rigs out, so.
Yeah. All right. So that was it for the RI. I'm going to give you a quick update on the PFAS aircraft alert area IRA. That is hard to say. So this is just the progress chart. The interim remedial action scoping, that portion of the project is complete. Currently, we're in the proposed plan and developing the ROD and the remedial design. All of those things are going on right now concurrently. The next document that you guys will see is going to be the proposed plan coming out, but we're in those stages, and then of course eventually we'll get to the actually implementing the IRA. Next slide. So just an update, some a little bit more detail on the schedule. The design drawings, the 60% design drawings are complete. We're working on the 90%, which are going to be done by the end of this month. We did have a technical meeting with Eagle and Water Resources Division to talk about the groundwater infiltration component of this IRA. And there is support for that, so we are moving forward with that as part of the design. Next slide. So the 3 pipes ditch pilot study, we've had a lot of conversation about that over the last couple of days. We are working on access agreements with the Forest Service to implement the pilot study. We're going to be gathering some flow data. We're installing equipment actually next week to monitor, rain gauge monitor and flow meters for data collection over the summer, and then we're actually going to put the mats in later this fall. But here's a picture. I think at the last RAB, someone asked a question, kind of what these are going to look like. So there's 2 different components. The mat that will go down in the 3 pipes ditch bottom is just a mat with some Fluorosorb organic clay material mixed with gravel, and you can kind of see the picture there of how that's going to lay. And then there's also some filtration tubes that will be going in, and those are also filled with the organoclay material mixture with gravel, and those will also be placed horizontally across 3 pipes ditch. Yes, Kathy? Oh.
Sure. So in our technical meeting yesterday, we discussed this, as you said.
Yeah.
Some of the concerns that we had were that the mats actually freezing through our Michigan's cold winters.
Right.
So which would I assume, deem them ineffective during that time. And I personally have an objection to having a pilot study in this train wreck of a toxic, mess at Wurtsmith, and I think that we should have not even considered a pilot study for this site. So just wanted to put that on the record.
All right. Mark?
A question, you said you were going to be measuring some flows.
Mhm.
Are you going to be measuring the flow that comes out of the 5-foot storm sewer pipe separately from the flow in the ditch?
We are going to be actually collecting data in 2 locations. One is at the old water separator where the flow comes out there, and then we're also going to be measuring down at the discharge into the Ausable River. So,
Thank you.
all right. Next slide, please. This is just a figure kind of depicting the location of where the actual pilot study is going to take place, where the mats and the tubes are going to be placed. Again, I know that I'm sorry for the difficulty in seeing some of these figures. There's a lot of detail information on here, and it's pretty small. There's a blow up in the upper right-hand corner, which is just a larger version of kind of what you see on the left. But this just kind of shows you where we're actually going to install the pilot study. Yes, Mark?
Bars on there where
Those
the
are
mats themselves?
Those are the tubes. The mat will be placed along the ditch, all the way in the bottom, and then the tubes for surface water treatment will be across, horizontal. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a quick look at the schedule. So this is the 1-year outlook of the activities that are going to be taking place related to the remedial investigation, the aircraft alert area IRA, and the pilot study. So we've got these broken up into a couple of different colors. The RI is on the top, and it's blue. In the middle, you see the aircraft alert area IRA schedule in the yellow, and then the pilot study in the green. We've got a couple of meetings highlighted on here, but this is just to give you an idea of what's going to be going on over the next year. And where the pilot study, implementation and monitoring, this is just 2023. That's going to roll into 2024, and I'll show that on the next slide, please. You sure can.
A couple of questions,
Okay.
and I'm gonna refer to, in the RAB meeting in February of this year, we were told then that the RI work plan, the work addendum, was going to be ready by the end of March, and we were going to have an opportunity to review and comment. I don't see any review and comment on there, and I see now it's going to be released June 5th. So, and it's for the public review. So the public,
Yes.
somebody changed their mind as far as us having, the community having an opportunity to review and comment. Steve, is that true?
That is not true. If you look at the slide 27, it's going to be issued that first week of June for concurrent Eagle and public review.
Okay.
Yes, we are a little behind schedule, but we have every intention of providing you the opportunity to review and comment on it.
Okay, okay, I didn't see that on there.
Yeah.
That's why I asked. All right, number 2, the CLAP addendum has included part of the east side of Van Etten Lake.
Correct.
Is the RI work going to be completed for the east side of Van Etten Lake by November?
This year, yes.
I mean, the fact that we haven't even seen the RI addendum, we don't even know what work's going on over there. So is that going to be completed as part of that, or is that going to feed over into the feasibility study?
No, that work will be completed this year. So all of the work that we have outlined in the QAP and the QAP addendum will be completed this year.
Okay, so in 5 months, you're going to have all of the east side of Van Etten Lake evaluated okay.
This field season, yeah, everything will be completed this year. Yes, Mark?
Since you probably already know what's in that QAP addendum, is there going to be any soil sampling on the east side of Van Etten Lake?
We
Or is it
don't
all
have
gonna
any
be
soil.
VAS?
We don't have any soil sampling on the east side of the lake.
Okay. Thank you.
So again, I guess we'll figure out in August when the next RAB meeting is as to what's in it, so we can comment on it.
Yeah, so you guys will, like we said, you guys will get the QAP addendum the first week of June, and have the opportunity to review that and comment on that.
But by then, it's going to be too late. You guys will have the work already done.
No, we're not going to do the work that's in the addendum until the RI work plan is final. So we are still working on the work that is covered under the original QAP. So we still have work to do there, so it's not going to hold us up.
You just said the RI addendum would be done by June. And you just said a few seconds ago that you're not even starting on the RI addendum work part of east side of Van and Lake until the comments come back, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that gives you even less time. So it sounds to me like we're not doing a heck of a lot of work over on the east side of Van and Lake.
There is the work that we're going to be doing over there, installing the piezometers, sampling that data, collecting the data over there. All of that data will be collected this year. We are doing a transducer study over there. The transducers will be placed, but we are going to monitor those transducers for a year. So that's the only data collection that will extend beyond 2023.
We'll go into the feasibility study.
No, it will be done. It will be part of the RI report. That'll be the last bit of data that gets into the RI report.
Okay.
Yes, Mark.
With the work proposed for the east side of Annette Lake,
Mhm.
The way that I've seen things going, you're collecting samples, you send them off to the lab. It takes them a good chunk of time to
Right.
get through those and the QA/QC and all
Right.
that. And so if there are step outs, you're either going to be working in the winter or you're going to be working in the spring. Is that correct?
We are going to, the goal right now is to get all of the field work done by the end of this year.
So are you going to get accelerated analysis of your samples? so
We
that
are
you know where
going
you
to have all of the, I will say, the drilling resources that we can get to be working out there on site this summer. So we're going to have multiple drill rigs doing the vertical aquifer sampling. We're going to have multiple drill rigs doing the soil sampling, multiple drill rigs doing the monitoring well piezometer installation. All of this is going to be going on concurrently out there. So following our steps, the soil and VAS can happen at the same time. And then once we're done with the VAS, the monitoring well installation program will begin. But we will have multiple drill rigs going on out there to minimize the schedule so that we can get all the data that we need, get the data in from the laboratories, because there are, the laboratories are backed up right now with PFAS analysis, so we want to make sure that we get all the data in so that we can have it and make sure we're done by the end of this year. That's not to say if there's something that comes up that we find that we weren't expecting that may lead into something else, but the plan currently is to be done with data collection. Other than the transducer study, which we're going to do extended, all of the field data collection will be done this year.
Okay, thank you.
Property owner approvals and everything else also?
We are working on access agreements, yes, because a lot of this new information, a lot of this new data will be collected off-site. So we are working right now on access agreements for those off-site properties.
Can you describe some of the, you mentioned the groundwater work, but I think folks are concerned why it's going to take such a short period on the east side of Annette Lake. So I know we talked about the piezometers and you talked about the transducers, but could you talk a little bit more about what you have planned for the groundwater?
Yeah, so we are going to be doing a source discrimination study on the east side of Van Etten Lake, looking at water collected from either residential wells or monitoring wells on that side of the lake, trying to determine if the PFAS that is detected on the east side of the lake is consistent with AFFF, or is it more consistent with maybe a septic release. So that is one of the things that we're trying to do on the east side of the lake. We're collecting that data, and then that will lead to additional data collection if needed based on the results of those studies. Yes.
Eric from South Township. I know Eagle had some concerns about delays in testing, I believe.
Correct. We were concerned about the break from April to June in the field sampling.
Why is that break happening? Is there a reasoning for that?
There is. We're in the process of modifying their contract to add an additional 3 years to the period of performance, and we're adding another $5 million to the contract.
Yeah, I think the timing is critical.
I agree.
Testing needs to
I
happen
agree.
as soon as possible, so
Right, and that's why we're bringing in all additional drill rigs to make up for this schedule. So it's not going to impact the ultimate schedule and ultimate end goal of having all the data collected by the end of this year. Yes?
One of the items you had in your presentation was that Water Resources Division agreed with the Aircraft Alert Area IRA.
Yes.
So I just want to mention here again that that was contingent upon Air Force entering into that substantive requirements document.
Yeah, we'll continue discussions with Eagle on that.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's the last slide I have. Oh, yes.
I have one question. As it relates to the Three Pipes area, with the Air Force and the Forest Service, them granting permission to go onto that, how long will that process take? Every day there's more water flowing into the river, and it just seems like to get permission just takes more and more time and more water is flowing into the river. Hasn't there been agreements prior to this point of working together for the betterment of our community and our natural resources in the area?
We address that. We do have an agreement with the Forest Service for all of the PFAS RI work, particularly in the Clark's Marsh area. The scope of this project is a little different, so we're working on a separate agreement. Shouldn't take us but about 30 to 45 days to get that finalized because we already have an established agreement with them. We have a process to get that in place. I don't think Paula mentioned this time, but I know in the last RAB meeting, our plan is to install the matting and the tubes across the ditch there in the low flow season, which is in the fall. So this access agreement won't have any impact on us getting the work done. We'll have it in place well before that.
Also, Scott, would be worthwhile to mention that this pilot study really doesn't have any bearing on or relationship to cleanup on Wurtsmith. It's simply testing this method, and it doesn't have any effect on the cleanup of the Three Pipes area or any other flows that are going into the Au. That's well down the line.
The pilot study will provide removal of PFAS. The material has been proven to do that. We're looking at the effectiveness of that material in this environment. So it will provide removal of PFAS. We're looking at the efficiency of that. It is not, and we are not characterizing it as an IRA or a substitute for an IRA. It is strictly a pilot study to evaluate this technology to see if it's suitable for other applications out here. In the meantime, concurrent with that, we will look at the additional data we need to determine whether an IRA is required and what that IRA would be to address the plume that's going into the Three Pipes ditch. So they are very separate and distinct activities.
Will that pilot study, then that helps you when you're moving into the feasibility study to determine if that type of technology would work out here on a larger scale. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, sure.
If we go back to the 1 year slide, go back one slide. The proposed plan public meeting, what is that?
When? Or
What?
What? That is the proposed plan for the Alert Aircraft Area IRA.
And how is that going to be done? Virtually, in person?
That will be in person, right, Steve? Yeah.
So this is a one-day meeting. We're going to have basically 1 day to look at the plan and respond back to comments. Is that what I'm saying here?
No.
At least 30 days to review the document. During that 30-day period, typically we try and do it about the third week. We'll have a meeting to talk about it. Still leave some additional time for the community once we've had the meeting and discussed it to submit additional comments if there are any.
question about that. Will the public get a copy of that plan before that meeting so that we can ask
Yes,
questions
the
during the meeting?
intent is for you to have that about 3 weeks before the meeting, and then a week following the meeting to have an opportunity to review and submit comments.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Paula. At this time, I would like to take a 10-minute break before we proceed with the remainder of tonight's meeting. All right, I think we have everybody back with us. So just one more reminder, if you've not signed in with us for this evening, the sign-in sheet is right over here by me. Please do that before you leave. And at this time, I would like to open the floor for any RAB member questions or comments. Yes, Rex.
Community RAB. This question I think is going to be directed to Beth and to Steve. And it's a topic I've talked about before, which is the SRDs. I am extremely puzzled why there's any stalemate between Eagle and the Air Force over the SRD for the Aircraft Alert Area IRA. I mean, SRDs have been around for a long time. The Air Force has always negotiated with the state to put one in place. Why is it different this time that you can't come to terms?
So under CERCLA, we are exempt from permitting. We have to comply with the substantive requirements of a permit, but we are not required to get a permit. The Air Force has agreed to SRDs in the past, but our attorneys have said we are not going to continue to do that with the exemption, but we will work with Eagle to identify the substantive requirements and work to meet those. So we won't have an SRD, but we will meet the general intent of an SRD. And we fully expect that the discharge requirements for this treatment system are going to be much lower than what they are for the existing systems.
Yeah, because the existing SRDs give you guys a lot of leeway as to how poorly you can operate and still be in compliance.
It's not the words I would use, but yes, the discharge levels are fairly high.
Yes. Okay.
Would you help me to understand, Bill Gaines, would you help me to understand why SRDs are different than AWARs? Perhaps they're different legally, but ethically they certainly are not. And my expectation as an ex-Air Force officer and one that believes in the Air Force Honor Code, that the Air Force will behave honorably. I must confess that I've been terribly disappointed, but my expectation is that the Air Force will comply with the spirit as well as the letters of the regulation. Is that an unreasonable expectation?
As far as your question on SRD versus an ARAR, I don't want to get in trouble with my attorney, so I will get you a distinction between the two. But yeah, we intend to comply with the general requirements, which typically are identified in ARARs, but we do not intend to actually sign up for a permit. which an SRD is a permit.
I still maintain that the legality of it is one thing, the ethics of it are another thing, and we really shouldn't have to beg to get you to comply with the ethical way of doing business.
Stephen?
I'd like to hear from Beth on my question, because if you got to Steve real quick, and I haven't heard your side of the story.
Well, if Charlie Bauer's still on the line, if it's okay with you, I'd like him, since he's from Water Resources, to go ahead and state their position on that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Charlie actually is coming to the hearing, so we're working on
Okay. So in the meantime, I can just say from Water Resources perspective, and obviously RRD supports this perspective as well. In the past, like if you think back to the FTO2, you think back to the CTS, that discharge, what we actually used for ARRs in those interremedial actions was the SRD. And so that also included reporting requirements on my waters, where Air Force would have to make that information publicly available, the discharge. We haven't worked through what exactly what exactly it means not to have an SRD, so I'm not sure if that reporting would still happen, Steve.
We've in the work plan for the alert area IRA, we have identified our goals for discharge, and I think we've outlined a sampling program as well, Paula. So it'll mirror a lot of the requirements in the SRD.
And we just want a reporting framework so that we have an idea of how that system is functioning on an ongoing basis. It's not unreasonable to have that. And I think we have it fairly well set up with the other treatment systems, and I think it would be appropriate for this one as well.
We missed the front half of your comments. Could you basically start over for us?
When you say start over from where? So we have essentially SRDs are permits, and they outline what the parameters are that can be discharged and the reporting requirements to the state so that we can track and make sure that those systems are working properly and that what is being discharged is meeting standards. It's pretty typical. It's a good framework, and we think it's applicable to this IRA and this treatment system as it is to FTO2 and the central treatment system.
Well, it sounds like you're stalemated. How are you going to resolve this?
Well, like we resolve everything else, we'll talk. That was what I understood the Air Force saying, that they're willing to talk to us. So we will work through it.
Could this impact the implementation schedule of the IRA at the AAA site?
From our perspective, we plan to continue moving forward. I would assume in the end it could. Well, I would say that it's not going to stop us from implementing this system. The details for monitoring and discharge is something we could continue to monitor or talk with Eagle about. But from my perspective, I don't think this will stop us from building the system. I think we all agree that the system is needed.
Will the lack of an SRD be an issue on any other proposed IRAs or final solutions? Or is it the intent of the Air Force to completely ignore them on everything you're going to do in the next 20 years?
The Air Force's position is that we are not required to get permits, and so we do not intend to enter into a permit agreement, whether it's a true call permit or an SRD. They're equivalent. So
from Eagle's
we actually haven't done that at any other installations.
But here at Wurtsmith and in the state of Michigan, it's done on a routine basis. It's also done on Superfund sites outside of the DOD's program. So from our perspective, it's not just being put on DOD, it's something that happens within the state. Our attorneys are probably going to have to get together and discuss this, as well as project staff. And then Charlie can speak for water resources, but my understanding is that without this SRD, we will not approve a groundwater discharge with the infiltration gallery.
So that puts a big lock on the on switch.
Correct. But again, we're hoping that we will be able to work it out, because I don't think either agency wants to see delays.
Correct.
Keep us informed, please.
I have a question related to that. If the Air Force is not intending to enter into an SRD, what will compel them to do a reporting of their discharge on a regular basis?
I guess the rod for that hasn't been written yet. That could be a place we could document our sampling and reporting plan.
I'd like and I'm going to go back to our technical meeting real quick yesterday. And it's in respect to the IRAs that are being requested by the community. And during the break, Paul and I had a bit of a conversation. I'd like maybe to get a little clarification. I was under the impression that according to the letter that was given back to the state of Michigan, the Air Force is not saying they won't do them, but they're saying that more data needs to be collected. Okay, when we talked yesterday, I was under the assumption that the data will be collected as part of the RI, and any additional data will be collected during the FS phase of the study. In order to have enough data, and Paula, correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to have enough data to either confirm or deny the IRAs, at the end of the RI, you will have enough data. Is that correct or not? So that data won't necessarily go into the FS portion of the phase of the program. So at the end of November, you guys should be able to say, yes, we confer with the state and the community that we need these IRAs. Is that true or not?
We will have the data so that the Air Force can make that decision.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And I have a question. So Tim Cummings, let's go to Township. Steve, so you mentioned a few times during your presentation that you had met with Escoda Township earlier this week. Can you tell me when and with whom you met?
Yesterday morning, Tuesday morning, with Josh and Tammy.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to come back to what I was talking about earlier, and I'm going to request that there are two action items. This is Ani LaRich for the virtual people. The first one is the foam issue. And I'd like to just read a couple of findings from the first article of information put out by a DOD grant hired Oregon State University to sample Van Etten Lake and Clark's Marsh for the foam and try to identify how high it was, what kind of methodology could be used to sample it, to address the issue of, and then also identify what possibly was causing it. And so one of the findings was the high concentration of the foam, especially for longer chain PFASs, are a concern because foam may serve as a direct route of exposure to humans through ingestion or to organisms that live in it, in the lake's surface where the foam forms. That is a significant finding and statement. This was in 2020, the year, a little over a year after they came here in 2019 to sample. Another one, preliminary estimates indicate PFAS-enriched surface water foam can be an important exposure route that poses potential risk for children and adults playing and swimming in the lake. Now, this is a DOD contractor of sorts with a grant to do this, and they made that finding. They also said that they wanted to statistically analyze their data to try to come up with a stronger way of explaining the foam. So in March, just 2 months ago, their second article came out. And it says that surface microlayers enriched in PFAS are likely present on any freshwater body impacted by PFAS, and as such represent routes of exposure to humans during recreation and to wildlife. The second one following that is enrichment, which means a multiplying effect of concentration from the groundwater to the body of water, 50 feet of lake and so forth, is another concentration. And then there's the foam that we see. Right in the top of the water, before the foam forms, is what they call a surface microlayer. It could be less than 1 millimeter thick. And that's where the PFAS sort of meets the air, and one tail of it likes the air. So enrichment in this surface microlayer could impact, bias on the high side, the measurement of concentration in samples collected for routine monitoring studies. And that is a concern of the people who saw the Air Force that take samples, or the state. It could, because you don't want to sample that because it's only 1 millimeter thick. You want to sample the body of water, so you don't want to mix the two together. Gives you a bias high. So these two reports came out, but we've been talking, Kathy, I think since 2017 when we brought it up to the Air Force, the foam, and their expert did not show up to talk to us about it, to kind of explain. But they did somehow, they got the message to DOD, the SERTIP, the Strategic Environmental Project, think tank. And they got Oregon State University to do this. So it's intermittent because the foam that's visible only happens on an intermittent basis when the conditions are right. But their statement in the report says you don't see it before the foam is visible, but it is there. It affects sampling because it's 20 to 30, 40 times more higher PFAS concentration than 4 or 5 inches below the surface. Okay? So,
Arnie?
Yeah.
Correction. It's about 500,000 times the concentration in the water beneath it.
Well, your studies. We'll add your report to this. But it is significant, and the foam is up to 197,000 parts per trillion, 4,000 times more than the body of water, 420 feet down. So the state has issued this do not touch and wash it off. but people are only going to do that when they see it. So the surface microlayer has to be studied. And we're talking about a potential, I'm not a toxicologist, a potential imminent and substantial endangerment classification under CERCLA. That's point number one. Point number two, the comment period to EPA on hazardous substance designation under CERCLA is only 2 weeks away, the comment period. But EPA is going to make those two hazardous substance. And we're talking about the state says don't touch it. And so that's action item number one. And I'd like to propose that we do a virtual. We ask these authors to join us. Let them tell us what they wrote and what they think. And then the RAB and the Air Force and can look and see if there's anything that really should be done, thinking outside the box, to at least, as part of the RI in the middle or toward the end, do something. So that's number one. The second one is the screening of wildlife and swimming locations. In 2017, EPA in Region 1 Boston gave Pease Air Force Base screening levels, criteria for children, for PFOS and PFOA, 2,000 parts per trillion for children recreating in the water. The Air Force immediately started a screening study and sampling. There was also one for fish consumption, 7 parts per billion, because that's how it's measured in the flesh of the fish. The state's start of concern is at 9 parts per billion. At 300 parts per billion, it's do not eat. So there's a range. Okay? But that Air Force site did sampling immediately, and they looked at shellfish, consumption of fish, plants, and the swimming and recreation. I gave you a copy of that.
Right.
I gave it to the Air Force November 1st of 2018. We were going to get briefed on it, but then it was dropped from the agenda at the following RAB. And I can share a contact with you that may be able to verify that. So that's action item number 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the RAB members? Kathy?
All right, I want to go back to the action item list. That is a running list of comments from stakeholders, and it is basically our map of engagement that I think that we, can keep track of. So I'm going to request that we spend more time on action items in the meetings and that we not skip over them, because each of them are on that list for a reason, so we need to talk about each one and not just handpick which ones we're going to talk about. So I am making that request. And in terms of the action item one of the action items that I had put on the list was the signs on our treatment buildings. The Air Force should be very proud of these buildings, I think. And when community members want to show off what the Air Force has done, it should be easy for us to do that. And I understand you might not want to say it's a PFAS treatment system, big, huge sign, but I would even at this point accept an acronym for a sign. CT1, FTO2, anything. Something that is on these buildings so that we can show people where they are and know, what's in the building. So I'm going to request that that action item not be closed, and that you look at that again, please. The next thing is, you had said that there was some issues about the stormwater usage fee, that it was discriminatory. Well, I believe that it should be discriminatory to the Air Force because they will be using it more than any other user. Thousands of times more than any other user on this space. So I want to just make sure that that's clear, that you should be discriminated against regarding that use. I feel like we have our community, the people that work on this site, or maybe not, the Paulas and, everybody that's digging holes, but some of the community members and maybe some people from the Air Force are desensitized to the severity of this site. It is a toxic waste area. And if you look at the budget for the Department of Defense on cleanup for PFAS, Wurtsmith is in the top 5. We are one of the worst sites in all of the U.S. for Department of Defense. This is a horrible site, and we are trying to rush through these RAB meetings and getting rushed through our action items, and we need to dedicate more time on this site. The fact that we are 13 years into it and we don't have a finished plan and we have to beg and plead for interim remedial actions to keep these flows of PFAS coming into our community is utterly ridiculous. Which leads me to the east side of Van Etten Lake plans for that. What I heard said tonight was that we're not going to be doing any soil sampling. Now, I wonder, is there anybody in this room that lives on Van Etten Lake, on the east side of Van Etten Lake? Yeah, so, right. So if you live on the east side of Van Etten Lake, what happens during a windy day?
Where the waves go.
Foam piling, blowing onto your grass. Where does that foam go? It doesn't jump back into the lake. No, it seeps right into that ground, and that soil needs to be sampled. And to imply that the source of the PFAS on the east side of Van Etten Lake is from a septic is insulting to our intelligence and insulting to all of the homeowners that live on the east side of Van Etten Lake. So that needs to be a serious effort to get all of that, all of that defined and determined that we know who the polluter is of the east side of Van Etten Lake. So let's get that done thoroughly and completely. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Mark, excuse me, Mark Henry here. I would like to make a request of the Air Force to, let's see, draw their maps kind of like they used to, with aerial photos behind them and or roadways, etc., defined on the maps, so that when you're looking at the maps, you have features and building locations so that you can identify precisely where those plumes are. I take exception to the maps as they've been presented for the last couple meetings as kind of plumes floating within the boundary of the base with very few identifying features to really explain or identify where those are. And I would hope that the Air Force would be more transparent in this. I think that they should make every effort to provide the data in a format that is easily understood and doesn't need you and doesn't require a person to take that map home, put it into a GIS system, overlay or underlay an aerial photograph so that you can actually figure out where these plumes are. Thank you.
All right, anybody else on the RAB? Okay, I will quickly review the public comment guidelines before we get started on that. Number 1, please raise your hand to indicate that you would like to make a comment. Number 2, when you are acknowledged, please approach the mic in the middle there, say and spell your full name for the record prior to beginning your comment. Number 3, keep your comment to 3 minutes or less. And number 4, RAB members will determine if follow-up is needed. Do we have anyone present tonight that would like to give a public comment first?
I have one quick addition to that. If we do have someone that submits a comment that they believe should be a RAB action item, and they would like feedback on that, we would ask that they also provide their contact information so that when the action item is addressed, that we have an opportunity to bring them into the discussion and provide feedback to them.
Okay, I do have Tony Spinola on virtually with us. Tony, if you would like to unmute your mic and address the RAB.
David Carmona, prospective RAB member. Tonight, Beth and Steve gave a prime example of why the people are distrustful in this community. The state has a requirement that's normally permitting. They will reduce that down to what they call an SRD, Significant Requirements Document, I believe is what that is. Substantive, okay? And the Air Force says under CERCLA that they're not permitting. There are other intergovernmental agreement devices that you can use to accomplish this and memorialize the requirements without a permit and without having an SRD. Why don't you use those other types of instruments that are available? The Air Force uses them every day, interfacing with the state governments for aviation. What is prohibiting you from using those same devices since they're available Air Force-wide? Memorandums of agreement, letters of understanding, those types of documents. They create the same requirements without the permitting and without the SRD. That's my input. Thank you.
For you, sir.
Hi, it's Kyle Jones, also a prospective RAB member. I would want, first of all, to echo what Dave just said. It's exceedingly common for any governmental agency to enter into memorandums of understanding with state agencies or the Attorney General, Office of the Attorney General of a particular state. To the degree that the Office of the General Counsel of the Department of Defense or the Air Force has made an interpretation that an SRD is a permit, then as a responsible party, the Air Force is responsible for all the requirements under any law that applies to the site. That includes the Water Resources Division's requirements pursuant to Michigan law. So, if the OGC is going to say that an SRD is a permit, and it is true that CERCLA does not require a responsible party to enter into a permit, as Steve said, but they must comply, that responsible party must comply with the substantive requirements of law that would otherwise be embodied into a permit, then it seems to me that the very simple solution to this is to enter into an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the Water Resources Division of Eagle, so that it's not a permit. It's so there's no inference, if I could get into the mind of lawyers at the OGC of the DOD, that an SRD, the inference that an SRD is a permit. The real simple way to do that is an MOU. So sorry for taking a long time to concur with Dave, but I wanted to give some of the legal input and some of the legal context to that. I have a couple questions about the 4 IRAs that have been proposed legally by Eagle and supported by many governmental and the community group here. We understand that additional data are going to be taken at each of the 4 areas throughout this year. I think we heard, Steve, is it correct that all of the data that you feel you need to make a decision about the implementation or non-implementation of an IRA will be collected by the end of 2023? Is that right? Okay. Has a work plan or some version of a plan for what that additional data collection is going to be constituted, has that been written?
Encompassed in our current work plan.
And when was, okay, so could I ask then when that current work plan was amended to include this additional data?
This data still falls within the realm of the current work plan. It's to continue to step out to define the extent and finish collecting the information that's covered by the work plan. So it's not new work, it's not different work. It's covered within the realm of the work plan.
Okay, but, all right. But there must be plans, if the step outs are going to occur or pursuant to the current work plan, there then would be technical decision making that would take place in order to figure out where the step outs will be done, how deep and how, you know, what constituents are going to be analyzed for. So, Steve, is it possible for you to either now, and maybe this requires another virtual meeting, but I think the Air Force is pretty well aware that the community here thinks there's plenty and more than enough evidence and data to support the IRAs now. So if the Air Force's position now is the additional data that needs to be taken is consistent with the current remedial investigation work plan, we'd like to understand very specifically what additional data are going to be taken. And is it possible to have a virtual meeting so that we can be informed of that?
We can do that. I think most of those sampling locations are on maps that have been provided. In fact, I think the posters in the back probably identify most of those locations.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I've probably taken more than 3 minutes. Okay, I'll sit.
Sorry.
Could I add on to that? What I hear is that there's additional data required and that it's already included in the plan. I also heard earlier that we have accelerated investigation going on the east side of Van Etten Lake. Why, in an area that's been identified publicly, don't we have accelerated investigation in the areas where you need data relative to these IRAs? If we simply continue taking data at the speed we are, then an IRA is meaningless because it will eventually be included in the record of decision and the final resolution. IRAs are things that are important to be done early, and you should really identify how you're going to speed up your investigation to get these questions answered.
As Paula indicated in her presentation, the IRA areas are some of the initial areas that we're going to focus our sampling efforts on this field season for that very reason.
Tony is going to give Kathy a call and put that up, or if you want to call him, Kathy. Thank you. Yes, Mark.
I have an additional question. Oh, is Tony getting me in? Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, can you hear me okay? I'm going to mute my speaker here so I don't get feedback.
We hear you well, yes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start my comment this evening by thanking each of the citizen and local government representatives on the Restoration Advisory Board. Your work has been outstanding, and you have done it under conditions that are far from ideal. I thank you all for the work that you've done, the questions that you have raised this evening. I think it's unfortunate that you have had to go to the lengths and the time that you've had to put in to work on this. I think the Air Force has made this unduly difficult, but I think you have done an excellent job, and I thank you for your work on this. And listening to the comments that were made tonight, I would just echo those that were made by Kathy Wisterbarth regarding the interim remedial actions. These should have been done years ago. No question about it. And we're not a bunch of people with pitchforks, running around like crazies. Our experts are telling us this. It should have been done before. And every day that we delay is a denial. So yes, maybe there's some hope, but it should have been done. It should be being done now. And I think that's come across pretty clearly from members of the community. I think it's incredibly unfortunate that we have had to go to these lengths, that we have had to bring in local government, like local governments like Iosco County, Oscoda Township, members of Congress, just to get the Air Force to look at something it should have done years ago. I thank the members of the board for bringing this up. Mr. LaRich's comments regarding the foam, I would note that when we brought this up initially, the Air Force told us it was washing machine detergent. Mr. Gaines has talked about the dishonorability of the conduct that has occurred here. I concur completely. And Mr. Cummings, who talked about the fact that the approach that has been taken by the Air Force, what it has done has ended up costing, in the name of saving money, it has ended up costing the federal government more money because the contamination has spread. And in the meantime, it has exposed people in this community many times over to exposures we know are dangerous, including the foam, for which there is a study that's been done by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services that seems to have been ignored by the Air Force. And so I think that I guess I also want to say thank you. I know we have representatives from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense's office and from the Air Force Assistant Secretary's office. I thank them for their involvement. I thank them for being here. I will say this, that I know that the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense's office is here to do a study. Glad to have you here. The study, however, is a study. What we heard about in Oscoda is study after study after study after study after study and no action. This is a study. This is a communication study. We were here. We were promised urgent action by the Department of Defense last year. We welcome your involvement here, and we welcome you back. The next time you come back, bring actions with you. And I would say, if you're going to study something, study the way this site has been managed over the last 13 years, because there are a lot of lessons here in how not to do things. Use it as an opportunity for improvement. Here in Oscoda, We have, as you can see, we have a board that is very active, very involved, and very knowledgeable. Heaven forbid to those communities who don't, and I think there are many, 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 many across the country, and I am very worried about them because they don't have the kind of people that we have here. We're fortunate. But study that and learn how to improve, not communications. This is not a public relations issue. The problem here is substance. And so I invite you to take a look at that. And I want to say to you that I believe that this community is willing to work constructively with you. We need honest, collaborative responses. We haven't seen that. We're starting to see a little bit, but it's not enough. So again, my thanks to you for being here. My thanks to the member of the board. I know that this community is not going to go away. We're going to continue to be actively involved, and we're going to make things happen here. But we would really like the Air Force and the Department of Defense to engage and to commit to urgent action. We're in year 14. That's way too long. Thank you.
Okay, did we have anybody else, either virtually or with us, public, that would like to make a comment, and then we'll get to yours, Mark? Yes, sir, in the camel.
Robert Tazier, former RAB member, citizen of Oscoda. I would just like to say, 6 years ago when I was sitting on that very panel, we talked about CERCLA. I never wanted to hear CERCLA again. It's just one of those words that keeps going around and around and around. I understand processes. I work in processes every day. One thing that I would like to point out here that I think our citizens of our community would like to know is progress. Again, my big argument back in the day was study, 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 which is extremely important for a process. But once you have some documentation of things, it comes to a point for remediation. And we still talk about processes. You can still be remediating while those processes are going on. And we have. There's how many plants are out there now treating those plumes? 8? Is that a number? How many are out there? 3. I remember the first year I was on the RAB, it came back that we needed, what, 16? We have 3. That was 6 years ago. CERCLA is not helping us here. Those plants may be helping, but I'm going to tell you something. I can't even tell you if those plants are helping. You know why? I haven't seen up a map on that very screen that shows those plumes that are being treated by those 3 plants. Has it done anything? Have they done anything? Are they shrinking? Are they growing? Is the PFAS just getting deeper into the ground? I don't know. Can anybody tell me that? The town would like to know. All I'm hearing now, just like Mr. Connie said, 13 years ago, he said this is going to get off the base. I don't know. It might have been off the base back then. I don't know. Those plumes, he said containing on the base. Well, here we are. We know it's off the base. So we got treatment plants there. Are they doing anything? Are they working? I wish you would just focus a little bit more on the remediation end and communicating to the public that yes, these are working. Give us some better timelines on when you get more of these plants in there, because if they are working, that's your documentation. It works. How many of those plumes aren't being treated? So the real discussion here is the sampling is very important, the process is very important, but we know things are working, then we need to be implementing the remediation like we did with 3 plants. Can we get 8 plants? Can we get 16 plants? The only thing that's really happening here, the argument is the timeline and the cost. Well, the longer you wait, the more it's going to cost you anyways. So that's one point. It never gets cheaper, okay, as you go on. the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So please concentrate a little bit more about giving to the public, are these plants working? Show us you're testing, you got samples going, you know where the plumes are, you know what they looked like 6 years ago, what do they look like now? Show that to the public. And it's fine to put it on little charts back here for the amount of people that are in this room, but what about the 7,000 people that aren't in this room? They don't get to see those little charts back there. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Tim?
I just want to comment that it wasn't 13 years ago. I made the observation in 2016, and it was about 6.5 years ago. Thanks.
Did we have anybody comment? Yes, sir, in the yellow.
Yeah, good evening. Bill Palmer, Oscoda Township Supervisor. First of all, I'd like to thank the Air Force and Aerostar. At the last meeting, I mentioned that I had signed a contract with the Air Force to put a testing well on my property. I live on Van Etten Lake, and part of that agreement was that I would get test results. And I brought up at the last meeting that I hadn't received any test results in over 2 years. I mentioned it, and some of the people from Aerostar went to work, and I got results within, I don't know, a week or 10 days. 2 weeks after the meeting, the crew came out and took another sample. So I'll be looking for, I'm hoping that the Air Force will live up to their contract with me to provide those results. The other thing I'd like to talk about is, as the township supervisor and a township board member, our primary concern has to be with the health, welfare, and safety of the residents of Oscoda Township. And not only the health, physical health, but also the financial health of Oscoda Township. And we have tried to maintain a good working relationship with the Air Force. They meet with us on a periodic basis. I was told they were here yesterday. I came into the office at 10. Apparently they were in early. I'm retired, so I don't work early in the morning anymore. But I would like to be part of those. But my point is that back when this first started 13 years ago, the Air Force indicated to us that any wells that were tested that were over 70 parts per trillion, they would fund hooking up municipal water to those residents. I believe, if I'm correct, there was only one resident that was hooked up, and that was someone who was already on a municipal water main. They just hadn't hooked up to it yet. So the Air Force did pay. Their test was over 70 parts per trillion. In our subsequent testing of wells, drinking water wells, in various areas of the township, we didn't find any that were over the 70 parts per trillion. However, we did find wells that were 10 parts per trillion, 20 parts per trillion, 25 parts per trillion, which obviously at that time did not meet the requirement of the Air Force at 70. Well, our residents were concerned that even though they weren't over the 70, they were concerned with the limits that they had. And so the township made a concerted effort to extend water mains into the areas of concern of all these areas in Oscoda Township to make sure our residents had clean drinking water. Now, since that time, we've learned through the EPA and their new guidelines that our residents were correct back then, that those readings of 10, 15, 20, 25 parts per trillion were not good. Those were dangerous levels. So what the township did, we were able to secure a couple of grants for the first 2 phases, but subsequent to that, the township had to go into debt. We took on debt through the DWRF system. They're low interest rate loans, but they're loans nonetheless that the township has to pay off over the next 20 years. Now, in our workings with the Air Force, we've tried to maintain a good working relationship because we felt that they wanted to do what was right. Now, we have had run-ins with their legal department in the past, but we still maintained that the Air Force was looking to do the right thing by Oscoda Township. It's obviously taking longer than we had ever hoped, but they are consistently working on it. But tonight I hear with the ideas that they're trying to throw legal questions at us and loopholes in terms of using our infrastructure for free. They've agreed to pay for the slip lining of the Mission Street plant. That's great. Our engineers tell us that will solve that problem. The central treatment plant, however, is a storm sewer line that was put in by the Air Force. It's been in the ground close to 100 years. And my concern is, at some point, that's going to fail or there's going to be a problem, and the township is going to be on the hook financially to repair that. Now, they're talking about no other customers are being charged. Well, I would submit there are no other customers. In the last 2 weeks, roughly, since we haven't had any rain, not one drop of water has gone into that storm sewer other than the 1.4 million gallons of water a day that the Air Force is pumping into that central treatment line. And we paid our engineers to come up with a reasonable cost for the Air Force to use that system. We submitted that to them in 2018 when they wanted to start the central treatment plant, and they began making those payments for several months. And then when the Mission Street plant went online, we came up with another cost for that. The Air Force decided they weren't going to pay anything anymore, and have just stopped paying. So my point is that, you know, if we want to believe that the Air Force wants to do the right thing. The right thing would be that Oscoda Township does not suffer a financial loss here because of the contamination on the base. And that loss is to the tune of about nearly $2 million that we've had to take out a loan with interest to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else make public comment this evening? Yes, we do need to really keep it to 3 minutes. We are already over, so go right ahead. Thank you.
My name is Chris Coulon. I am a resident here in Oscoda, and I'm a member of NOW. And we put together this little show and tell thing for you to see why all of this matters. And I know the RAB is supposed to be doing the environmental remediation and all of that, but why do we do that? We do that because there's people, right? In Oscoda, in the summertime, we have a lot of people here. On Osable River, has anybody been on the Osable River on the 4th of July in this room? Raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, we have a picture right here. There are more people than you can imagine. They certainly don't all fit on the bank, and they're running all over this thing, and right next to that is 3 pipes. 3 pipes discharges right onto all of these people in this river who come here year after year after year. On Manhattan Lake, we have our YMCA camp. Children from Detroit come to the YMCA camp. I'm not going to make a blanket statement about children in Detroit, but I'm going to tell you a lot of children in Detroit are from impoverished, minority, socially disadvantaged households, and they are able to come up to here in Michigan and enjoy themselves for a week in our beautiful environment, which is Van Etten Lake. And anybody who's ever been around there, when those kids are there, sees that foam. We see it every single day. Those kids swim in that lake. They boat in that lake. They are exposed to a toxin when they come from Detroit to enjoy their summer. This is why it matters. These are the 4 sites for the IRA. You already have talked about all these things, but I want everybody to see and everybody to know that this is the reason we're here. children that are here today, the children that we hope are going to be here in the future, and the people who are here in this room. And one more thing about data. There's one set of data that people need to be looking at, and I don't think they are yet. That is the morbidity and mortality tables. People are dying now, every single day. There is so much disease, cancer, all kinds of different things that a doctor in Tawas Hospital told me, well, I've never seen this anywhere else, but I'm not surprised that it's from Oscoda. Thank you.
Did we have any other comments from anybody? Okay, then I would like to invite our co-chairs to please give us their closing remarks.
Could I ask a quick question before that? And that is, I know you asked if there was any congressionals on the internet. Are there any Air Force personnel that we have not heard from that have been part of this? LinkedIn, managers especially.
I'm not aware of who's online.
Okay, in the future, I would hope that managers would let us know that they are listening in, managers, attorneys, and so forth. This group, we're being as honest as we can, and we're trying to be respectful in getting the message across. Part of respect is letting us know who's listening. Thank you.
And I know some of you know that I'm here, and I'm not obviously virtual. I'm here in person, but I was here in October. My name's Kate Lennis. I'm the Senior Technical Advisor for Ms. Nancy Balkus, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure, Energy, and Environment at the Air Force. My role is over cleanup in general and PFAS in particular. So I have been here, I'll be here next week as well. And I hope to come to all the future RABs. I missed the last one because I just gotten up on medical leave, and I apologize for that. But I am here and I am listening, so I didn't want you to think I was in stealth mode for those of you I hadn't met. And thank you for allowing me to listen.
Thank you. Mark, yes.
Two things.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
It's okay. I have a question about the potential IRAs at the landfill 3031 and DRMO area. And I understand that there's more data needed in order to characterize those plumes as they've moved off base, and they're not quite sure where they're all going yet. But I'm wondering what additional data would be needed to put in just the pump and treat system as the IRA at the DRMO area while you're doing your plume delineation. Why should you let more contamination leave the base when you have the area on base where the extraction wells would be placed characterized already? The second point, and I would like to make this an AI, the Air Force has installed 3 IRAs, but there is no performance data on those at all. Essentially, the IRAs were, as they were described to us, were to capture some of the contamination and reduce the mass that is leaving the base. I would like that quantified. In those IRAs, I would like started right now an estimation on the flux of contamination that is making it through that line of wells so that they can improve upon that and get that number down to 0, which is what they need to do to stop the contamination from moving off base. There's no reason why it needs to be done in the future. The systems are in place. They can be evaluated now, and they should be evaluated now to get an idea of what they're doing as far as remediation goes, and to find out where the weak areas are within those systems so that they can be improved on as the final remedial action.
Steve, did you have any closing remarks for us?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I think we've had some good discussions. We've still got plenty of work to do. It sounds like in addition to our tech sessions immediately prior to the RAB and the RAB meetings, we may need to have additional, more frequent virtual meetings to work through some of these issues. But we'll continue to reach out and work with the community.
I would like to thank everybody that attended. I appreciate your questions and concerns, and I'm looking forward to additional technical discussions to get the questions that the public has raised answered. Thank you.
I think until we get them approved, it's premature.
Oh.
I disagree. You can report. They were nominations. It's not, and there was no definition of like percentage of, I believe it's a.
Okay, okay, yeah.
Transparency would be
Yeah.
appreciated.
Sure, okay. So, I don't know, how do we?
Nominations be forwarded to your command or not?
Yes.
There you go, they're in, as far as we're concerned.
So I guess all three candidates.
Got a majority of votes.
Yeah, I got a majority of votes, yeah. Trying to figure out the best way to.
All right, thank you to everybody so much for coming this evening and your input. It was greatly appreciated.